first one's around global helpers. So helpers are essentially shared functions between our detections. As you write more and more detections, you'll start to see certain patterns emerge, and you can create essentially arbitrary functions and things like that that get shared. So some examples of this are, if you have a set of allow and deny lists, this could be groups of users, this could be really anything related to access. You could have internal mappings. So this could be something like an AWS account ID mapping to a readable description, like a dev account, a test account, product account, etc. You might have certain processing logic that you need to repeat in multiple places. So for example, if you have like really complex data you're analyzing that's highly nested, there's usually patterns that exist within that, and you can abstract all of that out. And then your rules become much simpler. And then you can also do more advanced type of calls, like if you need to access APIs or databases, or just do more advanced things that require a lot of state. You can define all this in a helper, and then you don't have to copy it into all of your different rules. So in the UI, we can see all of the helpers that are shipped with Python or with Panther by default. And all of these are also open source. They're defined in code the same way that our detections are. So there's the Python file that has all the logic, and then we have the YAML file that has all the metadata. And the thing that's important to highlight here is the global ID, this Panther base helpers, which is the one I'll use for this example. If you're familiar with working with Python, you've done imports before, things like that. This is the actual name that you would import into your rule to get access to those functions that we define in our helpers. So in this example, let's look at the base helpers. So if we open up this Python file, we scroll down a bit, we essentially see arbitrary Python. It can really be whatever you want. In this case, I'm defining a couple of different constants. We have some comments that explain really what the purpose of this function is. And then you have a function that can really take arbitrary key value pairs and return arbitrary values. It really doesn't matter. This is unlike the rule function in our detections where they must take an event and they must return Boolean. In helpers, you don't have that constraint. It could really be whatever you want. And as I was saying before, like this is a really common pattern to process logs in the same way. So what we're doing is we abstracted this common pattern with G Suite processing, made it a helper, and then we're calling it within a rule. So in our rule, what we see is, from Panther-based helpers, import this specific function that I've highlighted here in red, and then we're actually aliasing it as a function called param lookup because it's just a bit shorter. And then we would do our normal processing logic. We're doing some top-level filtering right in the beginning. So, the event ID, we're looking for Drive-specific things. So activity from Google Drive is what we're looking for here. If it's not within that, we return. And then we're processing through the events, and we're looking for certain patterns in those parameters. And then if all that matches, we get an alert. But you can also use this for your titles as well. You don't just have to use it in your rules. So it's a really common pattern to send titles that are very human readable and very actionable. So in this is a different rule. We're looking at AWS root activity. So what this would do is it would actually interpolate in the IP address, but also the account that was logged into with a friendly name. And if you look in this helper, I think this might be in the base helpers or the OSS helpers, there's a function called lookup AWS account name, where you just have the 12-digit AWS account ID mapped to a name. And it just makes it much nicer to look at.